North Korean soldiers are learning how to pilot these type of drones, how to assemble them, and how to manage them. Apart from soldiers fighting this war, there's also a lot of information simply on the web. Russians have a plan to bring up their capacity to the point where they can launch up to 500 UAVs at once. All the Shahed and Geran and Gerbera launches haven't broken the Ukrainian will, haven't broken their spirit, have not broken their society, have not broken their industry or military or the larger civilian space and the environment. NATO armies are not ready for the intensity of drone warfare experienced in Ukraine. Full stop and mic drop. Hi, my name is Sam Bendett, and I'm a member of the Russia Studies program at CNA, and you are watching the Drone Wars podcast.
Let's talk a little bit about the 4 or 5 countries in the last 2 weeks that have announced new unmanned surface vessel programs, right? So the US company Saronic announced this massive funding round. I think it was like $400 or $500 million, and how they're going to build a port where they can mass produce these things, right? I think in the next 48 hours, we saw the Taiwanese, the South Koreans, the Turks, a bunch of countries showing a Sea Baby-like copy of a product, right? So we just talked about kind of the tactics and the technology starting to proliferate. Share a little bit about your thoughts, when it comes to like, is this what the future of navies might look like?
Well, all the countries you mentioned are good studies of the Ukrainian combat. These are countries that are paying very close attention to the tactical and technological developments. And obviously, they've been paying very close attention to what Ukrainians were fielding themselves. Mm-hmm. Is this the future of navies? I believe so, in whole or in part. There are going to be elements where unmanned forces, unmanned maritime systems will be used instead of manned vessels. Mm-hmm. There are going to be situations where unmanned vessels will not be able to handle the mission, and that mission will only be able to be handled by a manned vessel, probably not a large one, but a mid-sized one. And there are obviously going to be lots of enhanced capabilities of legacy systems by unmanned underwater vehicles, unmanned surface vehicles, and vessel-carried UAV types, both for ISR combat and other missions. So I think everyone is talking right now about integrating this unmanned capability into existing formations and fielding those capabilities in different types of missions. Again, unmanned systems will not be able to fully replace many manned requirements, and vice versa. So it's going to be a blend. It's going to be a mix. This is what United States is discussing. This is what the NATO allies are discussing. This is what some of the leading maritime powers are discussing. And obviously, Ukraine has shown the way. And the Russians are also paying close attention, because even before the war, even before this phase of the war in February of 2022, they also were discussing integrating unmanned systems with minesweepers and other types of supporting and combat vessels.
So it's been fascinating, right? I mean, there's 2 kind of different approaches that folks tend to take. Like the US has invested heavily in their blue water navy and really cut back their brown water navy, right? Russia, as a bunch of their kind of stuff got older, they kind of had to just rely on a brown water navy, right? But if you can build a bunch of autonomous low-cost boats, let's call them $50,000 to $250,000 a piece, I mean, it gives a bunch of smaller countries an ability to exert power or defend themselves that maybe, a generation ago, the only way we thought you could do this is with an aircraft carrier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, U.S. aircraft carriers are second to none, and they carry the lethal power with them that is unmatched by most air forces around the world or most navies around the world. Mm-hmm. But those type of very large assets could be proven vulnerable to different types of missile and drone attacks. Again, this is something that's discussed right now as the adversarial capabilities are advancing at a rapid pace. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the technologies, unmanned technologies, are enabled by commercial developments.
Sure.
And so these commercial developments can be integrated into military structures and military developments. Mm-hmm. So this is what we've seen in Ukraine combat with respect to millions of different types of FPVs and quadcopters fielded by both sides, right? They're mostly based on commercial tech, readily available commercial tech. And so Ukrainian USVs are also based on commercial technologies, including the communication part, the Starlink. So a lot of mid-size militaries around the world or small-size militaries around the world now have access to the same type of commercial technology and can put the stuff together as well. So they can also field a growing number of UAVs or unmanned surface or even underwater vehicles if they so wish and if they so want. Of course, again, it takes a very astute understanding of the threats that these systems represent. And there's still a lot of militaries around the world which rely on legacy systems for most of their combat, although there's also a growing number of militaries and non-state actors alike that are starting to integrate different types of commercial-based unmanned technologies with their legacy systems. So this is a slow process. It is unfolding as we speak. It's been unfolding probably for a while. The discussions about integrating new technology with legacy systems goes back many, many years. But the war in Ukraine really gave sort of this massive push to the idea that you can field mass numbers of attritable systems at a fairly cheap cost with great effect.
At what point do you think a country decides we're going to invest less in, we'll call it big iron versus attritable, right? I mean, because like I haven't seen the same amount of surface vehicles be pumped out of the Russian Navy as you have out of the Ukrainian Navy, right? And part of that is Ukraine didn't really have a Navy, so what are the unmanned vessels going to go attack, right? I mean, but I'm thinking of somebody like let's think of somebody like Vietnam or the Philippines. You know what I mean? You got a lot of islands, you got a lot of like coastline. They've traditionally invested in big coast guards and big Navy vessels. At what point do you think in their brain they're like, okay, we need to think mass and attritable?
So a couple of things. Russia is working on, I think, half a dozen USV designs as we speak. It is ready to field some of these. The two that have been announced at military expos and in Russian state media are the Vizier and the Muray Eel USVs, which are, I believe, they're going into production, although the actual numbers have not been made public. So Russia has paid close attention to Ukrainian successes. It's also going to field its USVs in ISR hunting capacity to identify and attack Ukrainian USVs. It's also going to use these unmanned surface vessels to launch missiles and boats and attack Ukrainian shore and try to interdict Ukrainian USVs on their mission. I think with respect to other countries that have a lot of territory and limited budgets, I think it probably will take an incident of some sort where a vessel or several vessels are taken out by either a legacy system or a mix of legacy and unmanned systems, or maybe by unmanned systems altogether, to fully kind of drive home the point that these much cheaper unmanned technologies can do a lot of damage. And then we'll see a real maritime race amongst a lot of mid-sized and small powers to build these type of unmanned boats, UAVs, or training to launch these type of systems from ships. But again, oftentimes legacy militaries don't move unless there's an incident or unless there's a significant change in how battles are fought. Every major change in world's navies have been precipitated by a significant battle or a loss.
Sure. Where
newer vessels fielded by the adversary were able to take on legacy systems fielded by status quo powers trying to hold on to their status, right? And so I think the integration of unmanned systems will probably follow the same pattern. There's going to be something happening. Unclear what exactly. A war, an incident, a clash, where everyone will finally see the light, right?
Sure.
So to speak. And we'll see the advantage of unmanned systems versus some of the legacy systems we're still employing.
Drone Wars is recorded from Firestorm's global headquarters in San Diego, California. Each episode is filmed inside our X cell a modular industrial-grade manufacturing facility designed to be deployed anywhere in the world within 24 hours for on-demand drone production. Each week on the podcast, we bring you cutting-edge insights from unmanned industry leaders. Listen as they share the breakthroughs and technologies they're working on, the hard lessons they've learned, and the bold predictions about what the next 5 to 10 years in unmanned systems and advanced manufacturing have in store for us. Enjoying the show so far? Then be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now back to the show. So let's talk about kind of cost and production speed of these type of these boats, right? You know, I know there's different sizes for a lot of these unmanned surface vehicles, right? There's the 3 to 6 meter version, the 12 meter version, and then there's some much bigger ones too, like a 25 meter version, right? What type of costs are we really talking about with these systems, and then how fast can they build them?
So the costs are relatively low, right? They're in the hundreds of thousands, maybe up to $100,000 per USV. So again, we're not spending millions. We're not spending a lot of money. We don't use we meaning whoever builds them, and in this case, it's the Ukrainians. They don't put very expensive sensors. They don't put very expensive equipment on it. In fact, Russians have grudgingly accepted and acknowledged that Ukrainian USVs are ultimately a Starlink terminal surrounded by this floating trough. And I'm quoting them, of course, right? With the Starlink as the most expensive element in this construction. And everything else is relatively cheap, inexpensive, and something that could be manufactured rather quickly. And so, again, the costs are kept low because a lot of these USVs go on one-way attack missions. So you can't spend a lot of money building something that goes on a one-way attack mission, right? It's not cost effective. But you also want to kind of balance the mission requirement with other capabilities to make the mission more effective. So if it's a longer mission across, let's say, the Pacific or the Atlantic or in other seas around the world, you want to make sure that this USV stays on course, right? That it identifies its targets correctly, it can defend itself, and so the cost can actually rise. But it probably shouldn't rise to the point where the cost of a USV becomes comparable with the cost of a light manned tactical vessel. And so this is the balance, right? This is where we are sort of are right now, I would say, at this moment in time. We already know that Ukraine has shown the way in manufacturing large numbers of relatively cheap boats. And other militaries and navies around the world, those that want to actually project their power at great distances, want to field the same type of systems, but they will have to be more expensive so they can actually complete their mission. So it's this balance, right? It's this sort of a push and pull between the cost and the capability and the mission requirement.
So you've probably seen, I know you've seen, the open source stuff coming out of Iran and China, where they're actually taking old boats and refabbing them to be drone aircraft carriers, but also not just UAVs, but they can also drop unmanned surface vehicles, right? It's almost like a repurposed mothership for the ocean. What's your kind of take on that?
Well, United States was the first mover and shaker in that space. In World War II, United States fielded actual aircraft carriers, and it fielded escort aircraft carriers. And the escort carriers were large civilian vessels with basically one flight deck on top. And those escort carriers could carry a much smaller aircraft complement, but they could still pack a significant punch. So this idea of taking a civilian vessel, again, has been repurposed time and time again. Russia's logistics route from the Black Sea to its Syrian bases in order to aid its mission in Syria starting in 2017 also utilized the large numbers of civilian vessels that were strengthened to carry tanks, armored vehicles, and other heavy equipment. And so Iranians and the Chinese, and especially Iranians with their unmanned aircraft carrier, are basically just borrowing the page from history. Rather than build something from scratch and have the costs probably balloon significantly in the process, They just took an old vessel and put a flight deck on it, and they modified the vessel compartments for mission requirements. That way, they fielded an actual light tactical aircraft carrier on the cheap. But of course, the real question is how it will actually perform in battle, simply because a large vessel of this kind is going to be an enormous target for any of Iran's adversaries. And Chinese are obviously doing the same with their own developments, as they also try to devise their maritime assets and the defenses for these maritime assets against a range of threats.
Yeah. And so, like, I think you highlighted probably one of the key weaknesses, right? Is they are now big targets that will be tracked by satellites as they move around. So maybe the next iteration of this, once they can prove it works, is, a normal vessel that can rapidly establish, a launch ramp on it so that they could take stuff off, and then you can put it away, almost like a ghost ship, right?
Imagine a civilian tanker, of which there are thousands.
Yep.
With all kinds of cargo on top, right, and all kinds of cargo trailers.
Yep.
And the cargo trailer basically unfolds, launches loitering munitions or UAVs, and then folds back. And so it's still a civilian vessels from the looks of it, but it just launched a military complement.
Yeah, I mean, it would be terrible for global trade. Let's just say that, because now every civilian tanker is, potentially a target. But I mean, we've seen multiple companies come out and show, both the US, Western Europe, and even Iran, showing like containers that can open, UAVs or loitering munitions that launch, and then they close back up, and you can hide them in plain sight,
And Russians actually indicated recently in an article by one of Russian Navy admirals that the USV threat isn't just going to be limited to the Red Sea or the Black Sea. Mm-hmm. It is going to be a global issue, and the impact will be not just on the military vessels during combat, but also on the civilian traffic as well.
Yeah, I think there's a counter I've seen online. I think it's like over 120 vessels have been hit in the Red Sea by the Houthis or attacked. But again, that's super low cost systems that they're using. They're using drones and unmanned, basically fishing boats, right? Packed with explosives. Right. And that's repeatable, at large. So it'll be really interesting to see if the future of commercial shipping includes some sort of highly technical defense system on every boat, given, the threats and, to terrorism, then also just for hijacking that come with this type of stuff, right? Because, I mean, blowing up...
We already have a precedent, right? The vessels that have to traverse Somali coast, or if they have to traverse other areas with sea-based piracy, they now feature an armed complement, right? They feature guards, or the sailors are trained how to use small arms and machine guns to ward off the attacks by pirates. So this is just the next logical step.
When I watch those videos too, it's usually 5 to 10 guys on the deck shooting at these boats. Sometimes they hit them, sometimes they don't. I really think as soon as you put a swarm, and it doesn't need to be a swarm in the sense of like they're working together. It could just be a wave of independently controlled boats at the commercial vessels. They're going to be in serious trouble because they have a hard enough time stopping one boat, let alone 3 or 4, or the Ukrainian tactic, which is you go with 8 or 10, right?
That's correct. And this will push a lot of defense manufacturers and high-tech companies to provide a defensive system out of the box, so to speak. A shipping container-sized system that will feature ISR capabilities, signals tracking capabilities, some kind of jamming capabilities, and different types of kinetic capabilities. And if you have several of these containers on a ship, and they can very rapidly essentially unfold and launch their defenses, then I think there will be a lot of requirements for that, right? This is just a natural technological race between different types of offensive and defensive capabilities, and now it's kind of bleeding into the civilian sector and the civilian sphere writ large.
You heard it here first. Me and Sam are starting a defense prime aimed at the shipping industry. No,
all rights included. Yes.
Yeah, all rights included. No, but I think, and then again, it leads to a bigger question, which is like freedom of the seas has been one of the main things we've done to like build wealth over the last 70 or 80 years, if you have to now have armed civilian boats because navies cannot effectively patrol what is hundreds of thousands of ships moving over the ocean at any given time, like we're talking like true societal changes for how we have to think about these things. Insurance companies will get involved, governments will have to get involved, we'll have to have a standard for what this looks like. But you're saying with the proliferation of these things, again, it's not a conflict zone problem anymore. It's potentially a global shipping problem.
It's a potential problem, of course. And if, unless, of course, the world's largest militaries come to some form of agreement how they can mitigate this threat, because a lot of militaries came together and a lot of navies came together to mitigate the threats from the Somali pirates to the civilian shipping. And that initiative, that global initiative, worked up to a point. So maybe we'll see a version of that, but obviously multiplied at scale to cover the global ocean, if you will.
Yeah. One last comment on that. I saw that it came out, I think, in the Wall Street Journal that Russia was providing satellite images to the Houthis in regards to the shipping coming through the Red Sea. And that part of the deal was they wouldn't attack Chinese vessels. But I think that, the Houthis got a little trigger happy there and attacked a couple of them. I mean, that's the other part of the threat, right? It is it's the state, it's countries working with non-state actors to potentially disrupt this type of shipping, which could be a huge problem, right? Or even providing them with the blueprints to build their own unmanned surface vehicles, right?
Well, this type of proxy warfare has existed for a very long time.
Right.
It is centuries old, and we're just seeing a new iteration of that, but with new technologies, with UAVs, USVs, possibly UUVs, and other types of unmanned systems in the maritime and air and ground domains.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week, we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes every Tuesday wherever podcasts can be found. Until then, we'll see you next time.